Teachers of Reddit, what is the weirdest excuse you've ever heard that turned out to be true? That their homework had been confiscated by Colonel Gaddafi's police. Turns out the kid's father worked for a Libyan bank, and the homework was about aerosols. Kid had gone to visit him during the summer break, and it was taken by the border guards. Muammar Gaddafi ate my homework. I had a 6th grader come into class very sleepy during test day. I asked her why, and she said she is sleeping next to her dead grandma in the living room, and has been too scared to sleep. I asked her parents about this. Turns out it's a cultural practice of theirs to keep a dead relative in the home for a few days, while their spirit makes its journey to the afterlife. To answer some of your questions, she was from a large Haman family that lived in a small apartment. She also mentioned before the grandmother passed her family attached bells to the grandmother's clothing to scare away the spirits that were making her sick. Okay, that's enough Reddit for today. My cousin took my homework on vacation to Venezuela. My pet rats dragged my history homework into their cage and modified it to fit in with the aesthetic of their shredded paper nest. I told the teacher the next day, who didn't believe me until I could get my dad to vouch for me. Teach was all well, if she wasn't lying, why didn't she bring the remainder in as proof? My dad, because the papers were shredded and covered in rat urine. One of the girls I know from uni works in a college. Here, college is a name for vocational school, and one of her groups of students jokingly said they died when someone was absent from classes. So one day it went morbidly wrong. When she asked why, say, Dave was absent, the group replied that he died. She laughed and said okay, but seriously, and the class was just silent. Edit. For additional clarity, yes, it turned out that Dave was dead. For real this time. Very dead. A similar thing happened in my HS. Teacher would call attendance every day, and when they got to this guy's name, who was late every single day, someone would say something to the effect of he died after his name was called, and we would all cheer and laugh, and say things like he has risen. When he would walk in 5 minutes later half asleep, he was a hard-working kid who probably put in 40 hours a week at his job but didn't care much for school. One day near the end of the school year, at the end of class, the principal walked in and took the teacher aside, and she came in looking stunned and completely white and just sat there speechless. The bell rang, and when we got out into the hall, his GF was laying on the floor hysterical with all the security guards attending to her. The poor kid had died when he fell asleep at the wheel on the way to school and flipped his car into a ditch. I don't remember anyone in that class talking at all for the remaining few weeks of school. It was truly one of the most sobering things I've experienced. I gave this one. I was in college. I went back to my house between classes, only to find my roommates barricaded inside by police. Why, you might ask? There was a bull moose in our side yard in the Fish and Game. People were very concerned, so my lap isn't until 3 or something, and meanwhile there's like 8 officers having a standoff with the moose in my yard. This continues until someone decides that the moose is an imminent threat and they are going to try to tranquilize it. So they try that and it fails. So now they are going to kill the moose. It gets to be about 2:45 and I need to leave for my class, and I'm summarily informed by the armed officer that my lawn is not safe and I'm to stay inside. So I emailed my prof and was like, look, I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm barricaded in my house and they won't let me leave. I assume this will be on the news tonight. Turns out it was on the news. They interviewed me and I got an exemption on that lab. He told me later that he was going to 100% fail me because it was the worst excuse ever, until he saw the news story, in case it wasn't immediately obvious. Yes, this occurred in Vermont, because where else would this be a problem? I had a student who told me he was going to miss one of the exams because he was visiting a famous rapper in Florida with his family. He told me that the rapper, who at the time was a relatively big deal all over the radio, was his cousin and his family was flying out for a show and he couldn't skip it. I mean, I would have let him make up the exam anyway. I don't really care, as long as he takes it. But all his peers and I were kind of like, yeah, right, okay, whatever you say, man. He was telling the truth. When he got back from Florida, said famous rapper Skyped into our poetry class and chatted with my students about poetry and lyrics and such. It was actually really cool. Not a teacher, but a fellow student in my grad program last week. Sorry, I have to go. I just got a notification that my TV fell on my cat. Not a teacher, but my dog literally ate my homework in high school. I had to read The Great Gatsby in English, and I remember my teacher asking me where my copy of the book was. I told him my dog ate it, and he gave me that really, bro, look. Took out the completely destroyed copy and the expression on his face when he realized I wasn't lying was priceless. I'll see your cats and dogs and raise you a goat. We had a goat growing up. I lived on a dairy farm that we let just kind of roam around and eat our grass. This goat was a fucking terror. It'd chase after me and my siblings, tip over beers and lick them off the concrete pad in front of my house and just straight up headbutt cars till there was huge dents in the body. One day the family all went to church and my brother had been doing his math homework before we left, and when we came home our front door was wide open. Because we have a door handle, not a knob, my goat jumped up, hit the lever, and came in the house. We walk into my goat standing on our kitchen table, mouth full of my brother's homework, math textbook ripped up, and pissed on goat turds on the table and floor. That was the end of my goat's freedom. The next week my dad designed Goat Catraz, a pen with a little goat jungle gym and a shelter for him. I still don't think I've ever laughed as hard as I did seeing that goat with a mouth full of homework. My mom had to call the school the next day to vouch for my brother.